The Fantasmagorium show is proud to present Webs, Gliders, and Spiders, a show with not enough power to require any responsibility. Well, here we are, a much maligned too soon reboot helmed by the director of 500 Days of Summer. Andrew Garfield stars as the titular web slinger, and Emma Stone joins as the ill-fated Gwen Stacy. Spoilers. In the amazing Stacyverse, parts 1 and 2. Our rogues gallery for the duology of flicks are The Lizard, Electro, Rhino, and the Green Goblin ish. Are the Amazing Spider Man 1 and 2 overlooked, or are they underbaked cash grabs? My name is ScottyR37. Cat has been recast by Sally Field, and Steve wants pictures of Spider Man. Tally ho. How are you, Cat?
Good.
It has been a battle to get these two reviewed. I'm glad that we are getting them under our belt and in the rearview mirror. Let's just get it out of the way. Rip it off like a Band-Aid. How do you feel about Spider-Man 1 and 2? Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2.
A mixed bag. I really liked the first half of the first one. And then once it shifts to focusing on the whole lizard plot is where it kind of falls in on itself. And the second one is doing too much. Like, the only reason Electro is there is to have action scenes, basically, because they wanted to take the slow burn approach with the Harry Osborn Green Goblin storyline. And the Rhino, I don't know, it's like their extended attempt to set up Oscorp as some type of supervillain headquarters like the Legion of Doom, and it's just randomly there. And I guess they picked the Rhino in particular because Paul Giamatti expressed interest, and rhinos were like his favorite animal or something, and that's how that happened. And then another villain he forgot to mention, the Gentleman, played by Michael Messi, briefly in the first two films.
Nope. Who was that?
The guy in the end of the movie in each one in the credit scenes.
Oh, mysterious. What's his name? Fiers? Fiers?
Yeah, Gustav Fiers.
Yeah, I did not forget about him. He was not noteworthy, nor worth mentioning, because he only would have come into play in the third one.
Yeah, it is interesting that this is the only to date live-action Spider-Man films which actually address, even the animated ones, as far as I know, like why Peter is with his aunt and uncle instead of his parents and what happened to his parents. And I've never once wondered about that, not because I knew it, which I didn't, but I just didn't care. It's like, okay, he's with his aunt and uncle, whatever. Mm-hmm. So the fact that they brought that up and made that more of a focal point in the two films, I thought, oh, okay, that's kind of interesting and puts a little bit of a new spin on it. So that was, I like that aspect, even though a lot of the execution was a bit shoddy, particularly in the second one with the father having this like ridiculously secret lab in the Roosevelt Tunnel with how the railways comes up under the ground of like. We make jokes about how did Bruce Wayne build a Batcave. It's like, well, he's a billionaire, and I'm sure a bunch of migrant workers would love to do it for him because he could buy them all green cards. But
sure,
how did Peter's father do this without anybody knowing and keeping that? It's like there's no logic to that.
No.
And the idea that we have to be on the run for the rest of our lives because I delete. It's like, well, if you deleted the files that people don't know, it's like, are they really gonna care? And so it's a little weird, but okay, at least they get. And I have no idea if there's any level of comics accuracy to that backstory or not, because I haven't read into what became of his parents. So
the closest I've heard, and I'm not even sure if it's just a what if story, but it is what if Peter Parker's parents were agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And there had been some talk of them being spies, but again, I don't know if it was a what if story. I honestly think that the inclusion of Peter's parents are to try and distance this series of movies, or at least the first one, from the Raimi trilogy. This one seems very much like it's trying. It feels like a 90s movie. It was made in 2012. It feels like it is trying to be more hip and with it and appealing to teenagers as opposed to appealing to either the people who grew up with it or the kids who would find it flashy and fun.
How is it 90s exactly?
Being real cool with your skateboard and and the way that he acts when he's in high school, it just seems more, it almost feels like not another teen movie or 10 Things I Hate About You, but with a little bit more technology. It's not
right.
And it's an interesting take on the character, him being sort of like a moody outsider, Peter, I mean. Gwen Stacy is perfectly cast and perfectly acted as Gwen Stacy. Like I think that Emma Stone is great.
Yeah.
And I think the chemistry between Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone is fantastic. And it's a credit to Mark Webb. And I think that his only movie before this was 500 Days of Summer. He knew how to deal with the character interaction, and I thought he did that well.
Yeah, that's the highlight of the two movies. And I wonder if they had planned out the whole Gwen Stacy story when they first started this movie, because that's pretty much the only reason you bring in Gwen Stacy if you're going to do it right, as opposed to Spider-Man 3, which did it wrong. So I actually did like the way the whole Peter and Gwen story played out over the two movies. I think that's arguably the best part of the two films. And the fact that, like you mentioned, making Peter more of a moody outsider and, including the parents and all that, is trying to feel different, because the first half is sort of running through the same, well, not sometimes similar and same plot beats of the first half of the first one. Like with how Peter's at the high school tour of Oscorp, and he just effortlessly slips into the lab, like, oh, how did I end up here, type of thing. And then, gets bit by the spider, which would be fine, or not, sort of, if it was like the Oscorp of the Raimi trilogy. But the fact that this is supposed to be like a super evil Legion of Doom type Oscorp, then it's like, why are high school kids able to just slip in like that,
They have a partnership with Midtown. They have a science partnership. They have to keep up appearances and make sure they're giving back to the community.
Yeah, so that was there, and I liked some of the back and forth between Peter and Dr. Connors, but I wasn't sure that maybe they should have pushed that a little further, because again, once the lizard stuff starts, that's kind of where the movie becomes nothing more than a series of encounters between Spider-Man and Lizard, much like how in the first Raimi Spider-Man movie, after the first half, you kind of have a bunch of Spider-Man encounters with Green Goblin and that type of stuff, rather than really pushing as much into the story as they could have. And frankly, the Lizard's designs on wanting to turn the whole city and mutate, it kind of comes out of nowhere. It's like, the Lizard, I didn't get the sense was supposed to be a split personality type thing. It's like, you took this serum that's supposed to regrow it, it went wrong, and it's turning you into a lizard, but I don't understand why that's suddenly making him go all crazy and think that, oh, I have to destroy the, or infect the whole city and the whole world. It's like, that just, it seems like some arbitrary villain plot that they gave him for the sake of having a super villainy type plan, which they didn't really need, because much like I mentioned in the first, the first Venom movie, you don't need to have the Riot character in there. It's like a body horror film about this guy being possessed by a parasite. That's more than enough. Likewise, you could have done the same thing with Connors being, overtaken by this terrifying lizard type thing. So I didn't buy the whole evil plan, or how, Emma or Gwen Stacy is just like effortlessly in a jiffy is able to, work up an antidote because the plot demanded it. It was just like, I thought that was kind of weird.
Well, and see, it's strange, like with the characterization, and I remember the Lizard more from the 60s cartoon than I do from anything else.
Yeah.
And he always, like, Kirk Connors had a wife and a son, and then there was some sort of falling out with the wife, or maybe it could, because he was paying too much attention to his science and stuff. So the typical unattentive husband, and he takes the son as he's turning into the Lizard, and it becomes saving the son, because we're not sure if the Lizard is going to be bad to Connors Jr. And that would have been a more interesting dynamic in terms of saving someone that Kirk Connors loves, and against the madness of being turned into a lizard. That would have been more engaging than, like, I think he has a soliloquy that says, we were trying to create perfect specimens, perfect survivors and stuff like that, so I'm going to turn everybody into a raptor. And it's like, oh, okay, weird. And he even uses it as a weapon against cops. And so if he wants to turn them into superior beings, why would you spray that in the face of the people who are trying to apprehend you?
Right. And how he has this whole secret lab in the sewers. It's like, where'd you get all this stuff down here without anybody knowing about it? And why is it in the sewers exactly? Because as far as anybody knows, you were just fired. You haven't really done anything yet. You could just hang out at your house. It's not like the cops have any impetus to come and get him. Or why?
But it also, I don't know. Maybe it could be the fact that he looks like a giant lizard. Like, he doesn't want to go in and out of his place.
Morphing back and forth, which is a little weird. I did like the Aunt May and Uncle Ben. I felt that they had more screen time than Uncle Ben in the first Sam Raimi film. And I liked the way Martin Sheen played him, because I always thought that Cliff Robertson felt almost like a leisurely grandfather type who has more of an impact in the flashback scenes in the second and third movie than I felt he had in the first movie. And so I liked the way the Martin Sheen character plays it. I thought those scenes were pretty good, especially the conflict between them over Peter's father. I thought that was a really great scene when he confronts him about that and just leaves it, like slams the door and the glass shatters and all that. I thought that was really great stuff. Same with the running gag of him coming home and Aunt May finding him just always beat up and everything, and she's just getting more and more emotionally wrecked by it,
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell that this Aunt May clearly doesn't know that, like, what's going on with him.
Yes, I was trying to figure that out, but see, and I do appreciate what Sally Field and Martin Sheen are doing, but throughout the movie, I did not see Aunt May and Uncle Ben. I just saw Sally Field and Martin Sheen. It was almost jarring, and it took me out of it in a way that Rosemary Harris and not Glenn Ford.
Cliff Robertson.
That's him. And I agree with you that he was much more of a doting grandfather. They were like grandparents as opposed to aunt and uncle.
Yeah.
And so I do appreciate that. And I did like the interaction between, like, to see Sally Field and Martin Sheen together. Great stuff. Were they Aunt May and Uncle Ben? Not to me. And that at times made me notice, like, and I thought Andrew Garfield, considering what he had, was fine. But it did take me out. It took me out of the movie where I felt like I was looking at a People magazine as opposed to a Spider-Man movie. Like at one point, C. Thomas Howell from The Outsiders shows up, and I was like, "What? Hang on." He was the guy who was responsible for making all the cranes go.
Oh.
He saved Spider-Man saves his son in the bridge attack by the lizard.
Right.
So, and I just, there were times when it was almost like stunt casting or weird. It was just a weird casting where they were obviously trying to sell the movie as opposed to retell it. It does feel more, and I know it sounds, I described it as a 90s movie. It feels more like the Ultimate Spider-Man sort of universe with the mechanical Rhino in 2, the more sort of citywide stakes with everything. Just the aesthetic of it is, because Ultimate Spider-Man is the updated version for 90s kids, essentially. If you didn't have time to keep up with the long history of Marvel Comics, then you could get in with the Ultimate lines that they had in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I haven't read those, but
Ultimate Spider-Man is not bad. It plays around with this with the origins and the characters and such to, again, update them. And like Peter is more of a he's a web designer and he works for the Daily Planet, which is a website, and he's much more moody outsider than full-on nerd as presented in the Stan Lee, Steve Ditko stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't have that problem with Aunt May and Uncle Ben, but I also liked Dennis Leary as Captain Stacy. And that weird dinner scene where Peter's being like a total... It's like, Peter, you're not able to take your head out of what you're doing and seeing why he's, going around doing this, and he's just seeing it as, you're just upset because I'm doing your job for blah, blah, blah. And I'm watching this kind of weirdo, awkward meltdown sort of thing going on at the dinner table. I'm like, this is super awkward. And I'm totally on George Stacy's side, even though, yes, it's great that Peter's Spider-Man, but at the same time, I got to be on Captain Stacy's side. And I like how they played up that whole relationship throughout the film and up until the ending when he dies. And is it arbitrary when he says you're going to have enemies? Yes, because it feels like something that's taken a trope from every superhero story of all time, and this is being too blatant about it. But I did like how they kept bringing him back as like a haunting specter in the sequel. Like everywhere Peter looks, he sees George just giving him that look. Like, okay, and I love that. I thought that was really good.
Yes, and I did like that when I found out what they like. This is my second time. Usually we start off and say, how many times have you watched The Amazing Spider-Man? Well, this is the second time, and I think this is probably the third time that I've watched Amazing Spider-Man 2. But the second time watching The Amazing Spider-Man 1, I am more forgiving of Dennis Leary's character. I sort of see, and again, for me, it is much more talking about the actors than the characters. Like, I bring up Captain Stacy from Spider-Man 3, and I don't go off about James Cromwell because he looks so much like George Stacy that I'm like, that's Captain Stacy. I'm fine with it. Obviously, Bryce Dallas Howard is playing Gwen Stacy in the original Spider-Man 3. You can't get around that casting. But with George Stacy, Dennis Leary in Amazing, I just felt like he was trying to be a replacement for J. Jonah Jameson because they couldn't top J.K. Simmons for J. Jonah.
Well, that sort of makes sense, but I was fine with it because the thing I never really understood about the Jameson thing is that Peter is always agitated by the fact that Jameson is wanting to vilify Spider-Man left, right, and center. I'm like, dude, then go sell your pictures to any one of the other tabloids in the city who aren't going to do that. Like, I can never get past that logic with the comics or the movies. And so you're right, they are doing the Jameson thing, but unlike Jameson, where it's coming from an illogical place, with Stacy, it seems to be more logical in that, okay, you have a vigilante on the street, and he's probably might be escalating him, blah, blah, blah. So I thought that kind of worked. But again, all the stories kind of get converged and falling apart when they leaned more heavily into the whole lizard part of the movie.
Right. Well, and Dennis Leary does have a couple of choice lines in terms, what do I look like? Mayor of Tokyo? All right, you go find Godzilla. And so there are some interesting and obviously a little bit of on-set ad-libbery. But yeah, I watching it the second time, knowing Captain Stacy's fate, because I didn't know he was going to die the first time I watched it. And so knowing that this was sort of the death of the Stacys is these two movies. Oh, I didn't even think of Mrs. Stacy. What a horrible, horrible two movies. Anyway, but yeah, it's it is better. I don't know if I wanted, obviously what we got eventually with Spider-Man is better-ish than this. I don't know.
With Spider-Man, with which Spider-Man?
Tom Holland.
Oh, really?
Yeah, well, and just as standalone like obviously after this there are no more standalone Spider-Man stories, really. And so I'll have to weigh these against the MCU Spideys. I know that could be blasphemy, but with this and the standalone Spider-Man films, I'm curious what they would have done with a third one. Because when we get to Spider-Man 2, it starts off essentially with flashback scenes from Spider-Man 1. Yeah. Sort of setting everything up, same shots and everything, adding into the continuity of it that I didn't really notice. And I think what takes away in terms of the two of them is just the difference in costume. It would be more coherent if they had the same costume through both, but that's superficial.
I didn't notice. But I did notice
the costumes.
I guess there's a Spider-Man costume, but I was paying more attention to one of the other, like the fact that they kept layering the whole backstory of the parents and that kind of thing. And so, and you notice that both Lizard and Green Goblin survived the events of the film, of their respective films, to do whatever was going to happen in the third one. So the first one, it's like, okay, I like the first half, and then the second half just kind of, oh, we have to have a random supervillain plot because it's expected. We need Spider-Man to save the city. And it doesn't feel like Peter has much of an arc in that story because he's the moody outsider in the first half. He's kind of a little cocky as Spider-Man in his back and forth with George Stacy through the second half. And even though he initially says he's going to do what George wants by staying away from Gwen, the fact that they undo that at the end of the movie when he hands Gwen the note or whatever, and he says, or promises are meant to, what good's a promise you can't break? It's like, well, then you just kind of undid any character arc that he could have had in the movie by saying he's still the moody weirdo who just doesn't, he's just going to go back to having a girl. He doesn't really care about what happened or what George said. So it's almost like it's trying to be an origin story, but nothing about him becoming Spider-Man really changes who he already was before, or it doesn't enhance it really. It's like it doesn't enhance his sense of responsibility because he shirks it within like a week or two because he wants to have a relationship with Gwen. So
well, and also in terms of the structure of the way that we get from Peter Parker to Spider-Man, we get Peter Parker doing the investigation because of the information and witness of the crimes when his parents were around, when he's just a toddler. He's doing Spider-Man work before he becomes Spider-Man.
Yeah.
There is no real change between Peter Parker and Spider-Man. He just has more powers.
No, I meant like once he fully embraces being Spider-Man, it's going to maybe enhance his sense of responsibility or inform that arc, and it doesn't really, because again, at the end, he just, I make the promise to Captain Stacy, but I want to date Gwen Stacy, so.
Well, exactly, and the shirking of his responsibility and promise that he had made, which does, you're right, it undermines the character arc that would have been there in terms of him learning the words of Ben Parker, the most convoluted retelling of the easiest thing to say. Oh, I forget. I'm not even going to try and paraphrase it because it's just a vague paraphrasing of "with great power comes great responsibility." It's not choice. It's responsibility, and he shirks that, huh?
Well, they didn't want to repeat the line verbatim, But even isn't that something in the Raimi series that he doesn't actually say until the flashback in Spider-Man 2?
No. He says
did he say it in the first one? I don't remember him saying it in the first one.
Yep, he says it in the first one in the car just before he goes to the wrestling match, before Peter goes to the wrestling match.
So, yeah, I'm fine with them not ripping off verbatim, having it say the same thing again. But yeah, so that first movie, it's like, okay, I like Aunt May, I like Uncle Ben and the Stacys, and I kind of like that it's a different version of Peter Parker. It's not just the same nerdy thing again. But it at times gets, again, a little cringy, like when he's arguing with George and being all cocky or whatever. I mean, I like him as Spider-Man when he's like in the costume and the type of sense of humor that he has, and like he's not just like with Toby. I didn't feel much of a difference between nerdy Peter and when he puts on the Spider-Man outfit, whereas when Andrew puts it on, it's like you could tell he feels a little bit more comfortable to be kind of almost goofy or silly, like kind of like Spider-Man in the comics in a way. Mm-hmm. And I like that. So so that was kind of the first one. I wanted it to be better. I think it needed a rewrite, but
having Lizard's motivations be better. And how did you feel about the special effects for the swinging and the fighting and whatnot? And and also introduction, first time in on screen, on the big screen, we get the mechanical web shooters.
Yeah, I like that. I thought
Did you find it believable?
Well, I thought the action and the effects were fine, but I noticed that when he was working on the web shooters, I thought they would spend more time on that. And almost like in the little montage of him making stuff, it's like, oh, all of a sudden he has a web shooter, and just kind of goes for it. I feel that they spend more time explaining how the web shooters work in No Way Home than they do in this movie, or considering that this is the one where he actually has to use them. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, how much can each of the like wristwatch size web shooters hold? How much do you have? And that kind of stuff comes into play more.
Oddly enough, they do establish that, because the entire reason that Peter goes to the Oscorp is because his father had contributed to the tensile cabling that he was looking into. And so they do say like a pound of it would make X number of 100,000 feet or something. Like they'd make it, the amount of time that they spend, and it's the entire impetus for him to go to Oscorp. It's incredible how much time they put into those web shooters.
Was he thinking about the web shooters, or wasn't he just researching that because he was researching his father, and that happened to be what his father was working on?
Yes, all of that. He found out about he researched it. He found out his father's notes. He uses Bing a lot.
That was
to find out about no, I still use Bing myself. To find out about the tensile cabling, and then he goes and then finds out that the spiders are the ones, the genetically engineered spiders are the ones you sort of created or something, and then he gets bitten by one of those.
And then for some reason we have Irfan Khan as the immoral Oscorp employee who says, yeah, let's test this thing out on the whole on the rest home, because that's not going to blow up in our face. It's like, or be traced back to it. It's like, really? So that was a little weird. And Dr. Connors, my most brilliant scientist left here, doesn't want to do it. Oh, I'll just fire him. Like, yeah, that's real smart. It's like, let's just terminate our best scientist over one objection. And then the whole thing with the lizard, it's like, yeah, we could see that he's trying to, with Connors more than Lizard, that yes, he's trying to grow his arm back. He misses not having Richard there to work with as basically his lab partner. But it's like, okay, you're trying to, the whole gene splicing and stuff, but I'm thinking if Richard and Kurt had as close of a relationship as Kurt suggests they did, then it seems like Kurt would know why Richard tried to hide his work or abscond with it, when he disappeared before the events of the film, and therefore wouldn't be still vigorously pursuing it on his own. Because it seems like he should know that because of the way he talks to Peter about how, oh yeah, your dad and I were like this, and we were, working on this and doing all that kind of stuff. It's like, well, given what they reveal in the second movie through the flashbacks about how his father just basically destroys all the research or tries to hide it and everything, and it's like, well, did you tell your lab partner this, or was he on board with it? It's just kind of odd that Kurt Connors is continuing full steam ahead with this research, and he doesn't seem to be aware of what happened to Richard, or seem to be curious, because that seems something that's slightly incompatible there.
Well, it's a different writing team between Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 1 is written by James Vanderbilt, Alvin Sargent, and Steve Kloves. The only name I really recognize is Alvin Sargent.
Yeah, I recognize Vanderbilt. He's written a lot of stuff, wrote Zodiac, he wrote the latest Scream movie, latest 2 Scream films. Steve
Sargent
wrote the some of the early Harry Potter scripts.
Okay.
And Alvin Sargent's a name I recognize, but I can't remember from what.
I know or at least co-wrote Spider-Man 3.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not sure in terms of how much farther back. I don't usually pay attention to the writers just because I pay more attention to the director. I guess that would be my mistake. But when it comes to Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man 2, let's see, because I know we do get Kurtzman and Orsi, who are great. They're just great. From the people who brought you Transformers 2 and the director of The Mummy.
Stephen Sommers, or the Stephen Sommers?
The Tom Cruise Mummy.
Oh, God.
So, yes, the writers for Spider-Man 2 are Alex Kurtzman, Roberta Orsi, and Jeff Pinkner.
Well, I recognize Roberta Orsi from the other Sony films. Don't know the other two, but okay, that makes sense that there's inconsistency between the two films. And again, it's just the second half, and since there's no real impetus for the lizard plot, and the fact that it takes up most of the second half of the movie, I just kind of didn't have any vested interest at that point. I was more interested in what was going on between Peter and his Aunt May and Gwen Stacy and George, and so. Especially with Aunt May, because it's like she keeps seeing, they have that running gag of him always coming home beat up and everything, and I'm like, is he going to try and come up with some type of explanation for this, or is she just going to be left in the dark and they don't really resolve it at all, because she's always panicking about, where do you go every night, what the hell's going on, that kind of thing. And then of course we see how his conundrum with George Stacy plays out. But I was more invested in the stuff going on between Peter and Gwen and George and Aunt May than I was with the whole direction the Kurt Connors plot goes. Plus, if the first movie is going to start leaning him to researching his father and all that, then why don't you let that be the first story so we can get the whole origin and backstory out of the way, and then move on to telling better Spider-Man stories. It's like it feels like you don't need, find another character to bring in to finish off that origin or that backstory for the parents, and let that be the mystery of the movie, because that's really what his big conflict was with Uncle Ben at the very end. He's like, you keep talking up my father, but where is he? Like, what the hell is he doing? And the fact that they pushed that mystery much harder in the first one, whereas the second one, it just feels like it's popping up because I guess they felt obligated to fill you in on the rest of it. And so I felt they should have just had that be more the focus of the second half of the film and pick somebody else from Oscorp or whatever to be, or find a way to make that, because the two things are not compatible. Like the Kirk Connors struggle and what he's trying to do versus Peter trying to find out what his father was doing and why they end up disappearing or whatnot, just didn't seem like it really comes together that well in the first movie.
Well, you make an excellent point, just in terms of if you guys were all buddy-buddy and you'd known each other and worked side by side for years and years, there would give your, at the very least, give him a heads up. If there was some sort of intellectual espionage, industrial espionage, where something was stolen, does that mean that Richard Parker, also the name of the tiger from Pi, Life of Pi, anyway.
Which Irfan Khan is also in.
Oh, that's true. That's true. But like, why wouldn't you tell him, warn him? Does he, any of his research, does it have any bearing?
Yeah, and it's one thing if maybe Richard didn't want to tell him because he could tell that Kurt had a more personal angle, obviously, with trying to get his limb back, but then use that then. It's like, try and find a way to push this further rather than this random, I want to mutate the human race type thing. And then the fact that the whole storyline and backstory of Peter's parents kind of gets shelved in the last third of the film or whatever to deal with the whole lizard stuff. And so I just don't feel it came together as well as it could have.
You're absolutely right. I have no argument with that. And by the way, there is a difference between the two spider suits. One is very muted and it's got very pointy eyes. The next one is the Amazing Spider-Man 2 spider suit is great.
Yeah. Let's see what it actually looks like. I got it.
All right. Okay, cool. You do have to see the differences.
Yeah, I remember what the eyes look like in the first one. Okay, yeah, the eyes are different, but okay.
Let's get a little bit of a visual. Here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like that's
the first one. Yeah. Seems like they're always striving to make the suits look different. Yeah.
Fairly consistent in the first two, or the
I think trilogy. That poster, I think that cover for the second one is perfect, just to express the problems with that movie. It's just overstuffed.
Yeah. I can't even believe the Rhino shows up on the cover.
So now moving on to the second film.
The
Rhino, I think, is the biggest piece of stunt casting for me because I love Paul Giamatti, one of my favorite actors, but it's like, why are you here playing this really laughably bad, villain? I mean, yeah, the action scene in the beginning is good when they're juxtaposing it against the graduation and Peter having to rush to get there, but it's like, but why is it this? Like, why is it here? Why does it come back to be? It's like, Oscorp has this evil plan and all this technology. Oh, I know. We'll just unleash one with our tech on the street and see what happens. It's like, I didn't really get and it just didn't. I don't know. It was a little weird.
Well, he doesn't don the Rhino suit until the end of the movie.
Right.
He's basically captured and put in jail for doing an armed car robbery.
Yeah, like armed car robbery or something. But it was still kind of, even in the beginning without the suit, it was still goofy. Like his whole performance as that character was just like, I kept seeing Paul Giamatti trying to be this Russian gangster and overacting to the nth degree. And I'm like, what is this?
Well, I always like the idea of having a minor villain at the beginning that you take out, and then you get on with the almost like a Bond pre-credit sequence, which I enjoyed the idea for, but the way that it was pumped up in the promotional materials was like, and the Rhino is going to be in this, and we'll see a bunch of that, and then that's also infamously had the final shot of the film in the trailer.
That's right.
With the whole thing. So, yeah. Amazing Spider-Man 2 is okay. It is the highlight of the film, I would say, is the romance between Peter and Gwen. And it does sort of crescendo with the death of Gwen Stacy.
Yes.
After that, there is an epilogue, and it does look like we're going to be carrying on until Spider-Man 3, which never came to fruition. Everything that happens between the first appearance of the Rhino and the last appearance of the Rhino is such a cluttered to-do list, basically just having to build up to the death of Gwen Stacy. We find out about Norman Osborn being a childhood friend that was never discussed, even though Peter had been to Oscorp, and never says, oh yeah, Harry used to be my friend. I remember Harry. Like, that would be a way to get to know Gwen more. She's all in the pocket of Oscorp. Oh yeah, I used to be friends with Harry Osborn. Never mentioned once. And yes, Jill, welcome. Thank you. I heard she dies. Yes, spoilers. Gwen Stacy. Spoilers for a film from 2014. I apologize. 9-year spoiler. She dies. Actually, it's a spoiler from the 70s. From the original comic. And again, Emma Stone is phenomenal as Gwen Stacy. Andrew Garfield, I think, is, well, and it helps that he's got the better spider suit this time. I think he's great as Spider-Man. I always find it silly when I see Spider-Man in conventional situations. So, for those who don't know, Harry Osborn is the son of Norman Osborn, who is dying of a genetic mutation. Like he's got some freaky deaky sick stuff. And so Harry's come back to town after a long absence to meet with Chris Cooper from Adaptation, who is Norman Osborn. He doesn't do anything. He just lies there and says that Harry's awful. Here's my life work on a thumb drive. And he gets...
And how inexplicably Harry didn't know that this condition was genetic. It's like he never bothered looking it up out of even mild curiosity.
Nope. First time to tell you is on my deathbed the night before my death. Anyway, they figure out somehow that Spider-Man's blood is the way to is going to help with a formula that could save not only Norman's life, or could have saved Norman's life, but will also save Harry's life. Harry asks Peter to get Spidey to have a conversation about whether or not his blood is available for a formula. And the reason I bring all of this up, I had to catch you up to speed in terms of the context. Spider-Man shows up and they have a conversation on, like, in two chairs. They're both sitting. It is the most distracting thing in the world to see a serious conversation go on with a guy dressed like Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Like, stick to a wall, do something more Spider-Man-y. Don't sit there.
And why bother showing up as Spider-Man if you're not going to give him what he wants anyway?
Mm-hmm.
It's like
that doesn't...
Or Peter could have lied and said he couldn't find Spider or something, you know? But I think the problem is with the movie is that I thought the Harry story was stronger than the Electro story. It's just that get rid of Electro and just lean all in on the Harry story. I can buy that he doesn't bring up Harry in the first movie simply because Harry's been gone a long time and he doesn't really talk to anybody. There's no reason for him to bring up Harry to Dr. Connors or Gwen. And so he's back and it's like, okay, they have this kind of awkward friendship, but because they're having to shoehorn in all this stuff with Electro, you don't really get to develop. They kind of start developing the Harry and Peter relationship, and then it has to move towards the plot points, which is, oh, it's Spider-Man's blood that's going to save me. And like you mentioned, blah, blah, blah happens. And Peter ends up finding out that the reason he didn't die of it was because his father coated the serum with his own DNA, hence why Peter didn't turn into a monster or whatever when he got it. And then they had to shoehorn in again that whole backstory of finding the rest of the information of what happened to his parents and why. That his father basically found out Oscorp was going to use the research for evil, and so they thought, oh, we can't take Peter with us because they're going to be hunting us down for the rest of our lives, and they all get killed by what basically amounts to a suicidal agent in a kamikaze mission on this private jet. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, they die, and then you got the ridiculous thing in the Roosevelt Tunnel, which Peter eventually figures out, doing a lot more detective work again, trying to figure out what his dad was up to. And as a consequence, you don't really get to flesh out the Harry story very much until he comes back to do what he really is there to do, which is kill Gwen Stacy. And it's like they did the Peter and Gwen story very well, but if you want it to really stick the landing, you have to make sure whether it's Norman Osborn or Harry Osborn, it doesn't make a difference at this point. You got to make sure that story is strong too, and it's not. Because they stupidly felt the need to shove in Electro, who, yeah, played by Jamie Foxx, is a really good actor, but I felt that while it's a unique angle they went with to make him a guy who's kind of like socially off a bit, I felt that he dialed it up to 11 to the point that it wasn't believable that this guy could even live by himself. Like, this guy should be in like a group home or something. He was way too out there. I just didn't buy that this guy was able to, or like when the BJ Novak character who keeps picking on him at work and thinks it'd be a good idea to tell this guy to stay behind, and a cheap 80s bully type move, but it's like, you really want to be potentially responsible for having this guy stay back there and maybe something bad happening? Okay. And then he just, randomly becomes Electro. And at first it's like, okay, he's scared of his powers, not really knowing what's going on, and like feeling the electricity and kind of needing it. And because of his like whole entire mental, like his whole psychosis of being obsessed with Spider-Man and thinking that, oh, Spider-Man saved me, so he must know me, and all this kind of like really blowing it out of proportion to the point that he's obsessed with almost like famous people seeing him, because you got the sense at work that nobody really did see him and pushing him around or whatnot. And somehow that morphs into, they hinted that the fact that he, I guess, designed the power grid that the city uses and Oscorp stole it from him. But you don't get the sense he's upset about that at the beginning of the movie. It's not until he turns into Electro that he kind of brings it up. And it's like, oh, okay. That's like a whole separate thing that could be the plot of its own movie and a frankly strong villain motivation. But why is it here? And then, much like in Spider-Man 3, when they gave Harry Osborn amnesia to push him out of the script for a while, they have Electro get captured and sent to Ravencroft and literally lower him down in a pool of water to be out of the movie, so they can go back to pushing in on the Harry plot and the Gwen Stacy plot. And then they don't bring back Electro until they really need him towards the end. Well, not really need him. They just decided to arbitrarily have Harry use him to get revenge on Oscorp and, have, again, a big villain fight for Spider-Man. Because it's like, oh, if he's going to lose the Goblin fight, we need to have him win at least one other fight. And it's like, yeah, I kind of like how they tried to tie in the fact that Peter's starting to regret getting Gwen further involved and trying to get her to stay back. And he's like really upset with her, and she keeps like saying, no, this is my choice. But I just didn't feel the Electro story needed to be here like at all. And if you're going to tell, and then on top of that, they have the whole corporate espionage plot at Oscorp with what's his name? The guy on the board who's trying to scheme to get Harry kicked out of the company and potentially arrested.
Oh, right. Comfior.
Yeah. And so you got all these plots going on to the point that it's mostly relentless plot and not much of a story, except for, again, the chemistry between Andrew and Emma. Now, I'm one of the few people who didn't really care about the Goblin makeup because the movie had made so many other mistakes up to that point that I was like, whatever.
Yeah.
I liked it, but I admittedly liked it better than the Power Rangers suit that Willem Dafoe wore in the first movie. And I liked that the Goblin this time was smart enough to put two and two together to realize that, okay, so Peter Parker's Spider-Man. And I did like the final confrontation between them. It didn't need to be longer. I liked how that went. What?
I can't abide the Green Goblin in this movie. I think that it's better than the Power Ranger suit, no argument whatsoever. I think that it could have gone with another pass at the makeup. I think he does.
100.
He looks like a troll. And also the revelation that Spidey is Peter is just because Peter and Gwen are in the same place at the same time. And I guess that's enough to put the pieces together, but I don't recall Harry and Gwen ever meeting each other. They
did. They met in the elevator at Oscorp when she was looking up Max Dillon. She was looking up Max Dillon on the computers after they deleted him from deleted all of his employee records, and the security were coming to get her. And she first ducks into an elevator, and Harry happens to be in there, and she's kind of shocked to see him. And they're talking about, and that's where he finds out that he's been dating Gwen. And she mentions that about something about Peter's work that kind of gets Harry kind of thinking about it. And so later on, once Peter, when he first asked Peter, I need Spider-Man's blood, he made sure to hit him with the fact that, hey, I know you take the pictures and I know this about you. But like he said, I know that you know Spider-Man, that this isn't just a side that I know that you actually know this, because he's trying to like hit him with a zinger. He doesn't want Peter to try and lie his way out of it. And that's when Peter says, oh yeah, sure. I'll help you with this. So that's why he was able to piece that together, I think, at the end.
It is. Okay. And so maybe I was making a sandwich or something when they met. Captain Finity is here, ahoy, sir. The idea of getting a pass because they made so many other mistakes. A good argument for being a slacker.
No, it's called me giving up on the movie because it's already fallen off a cliff. It's again the villain syndrome where you're just trying to shoehorn in a bunch of villains that don't need to be there. Because it's like again, I go back to the Spider-Man 2 argument, which is they had a strong story for Peter and MJ and Harry and Aunt May, and they kind of throw in Doc Ock for the sake of, because you need Spider-Man to have a villain to fight and to have action scenes. But the story that everybody's investing in for the bulk of it is what's going on with Peter and that triangle between Peter, Harry, and MJ. Mm-hmm. And Doc Ock is very much on the periphery. And the movie works so well because they trusted that the audience was invested enough in the characters that they're not going to care about the fact that it's not a super villain-centric film. And they seem to have forgotten that going into Spider-Man 3 and now The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which is odd because you have the same, producer Avi Arad on it, and it's like you have the same guy. It's like, dude, this works so well. And by now, 2014, or I guess summer 2012, when they started planning out the sequel, it had been 8 years since Spider-Man 2 had come out, and it had already cemented itself in pop culture lore as being one of the best superhero films ever. So it's like, okay, pick up on that. It's like, you don't need to throw in all this extra crap onto one, like dogpiling a bunch of shit into one movie. It wasn't needed. Just focus on, if you want to finish the Gwen Stacy story and do it right, then just bring in Harry and iron that out and have that be your A and B plot. The Gwen and Peter story, and then how Harry and Peter's story kind of merged to end up with the death of Gwen Stacy. And I think the audience would have gone along for it if they'd just let them invested in the characters rather than the Spider-Man stuff.
Well, and I like the idea, and it's obvious because this is something that Sony's been doing since, I would say, Spider-Man 3, is the setup for the future of what is Sony going to do next. Are they going to spin off a different character? Because they'd already been pretty much headed towards the Sinister Six movie since like Spider-Man 3. They've been saying that they want to do a Sinister Six movie, and this was essentially the Spider-Man movies that they were going to do it with. That's why there's the introduction, even at the end of Spider-Man 2, when they show Dr. Octopus's legs, they show the Vulture's wings. There are hints as to what's going to be happening down the line. So I like the idea in Spider-Man 2, even if you did want to do multi-villain, like I said, instead of even doing just a pre-credit sequence with a minor villain and then we're done with that, on to the main adventure, you could have minor villain with Rhino and then minor villain with Electro. Dispense with those two because Spider-Man's awesome and he can solve crimes in New York City. And then you take on something that's more personal, which is typically what happens in Spider-Man comics anyway. He's taken down the Shocker. And what does the Shocker know? Not much. But when he's done with the Shocker, he's got to deal with like the Scorpion, who is being sent specifically by J. Jonah Jameson. And if the Scorpion doesn't get Spider-Man, then Max Gargan is going to go and get all pissy with J. Jonah, thusly putting someone that Peter knows in danger. And so there is a progression that could be made with this. But again, we are dealing with the incredible talents of the JJ crew. I looked up the Pinkner boy, and apparently he got his start on Alias. So this is all just, this is all J.J. Abrams' cast of characters doing what they all do. They start something that they have no idea how to finish.
Yeah,
they know that there's the cherry of Gwen Stacy, and that's it. We can kill her, and then the rest of the movie, I don't know. We'll figure that in part 3.
Yeah, I forgot that. That's a good point, that Sony was constantly obsessed for some reason with doing a Sinister Six movie, much less with how it was going to set it up properly. And so that's, I guess, the impetus behind having Oscorp be like this Legion of Doom type evil thing that they've been setting up in these first 2 Amazing Spider-Man films. That even at the end of the second one, I still can't figure what the story for the third one would have been, or what the gentleman cares about. Like, do you want Spider-Man because you want to study him like a lab rat to try and replicate it some way? It's like, maybe. But what does this have to do with unleashing the Rhino on the street just to test out your It's like, the suit works. You see how it's supposed to function. You don't really need to unleash him on the streets or to cause chaos or whatever arbitrary reason they came up with it for. And the fact that you have basically a double ending in that in the first movie, it ends with Gustav Frears going to meet Kurt Connors in prison. And then it ends the same way again with Gustav going to meet Harry in prison, who's now got like this partial antidote or whatever to kind of recover from the goblin thing. And I'm like, wait a minute. If the serum that was coded to Peter's DNA turned Harry into the goblin specifically because he obviously doesn't share that DNA, then shouldn't he still be susceptible to the disease that's supposed to kill him? Or maybe he is still susceptible. I don't know, because he looked because Gustav comments say, hey, you're looking a lot better, because he doesn't look like a goblin and he doesn't have the rash from that illness on his throat anymore. So I guess it kind of worked. I don't really get it. And so
he had a scar.
Yeah, so I don't get what that's about. And then frankly, some of the Electro stuff was just too goofy and way overacted. I could see why in No Way Home they just broke the fourth wall by Lizard asking him, hey Max, last time I saw you had a glasses and a comb over, like or like what happened? And he doesn't even acknowledge. He just kind of gives him the look, because obviously nobody really wanted to see that version of Electro again, but they would be excited to see Jamie Foxx come back and do a much better, like let him do a better version of that. Which made the Electro in this movie just really grating. And I didn't buy either the fact that during the whole Times Square fight, then you have all these people standing behind the guardrails just kind of watching and cheering. It's like, no, they're going to be getting the frick away from there. Same with the end of the movie when the Rhino shows up. The guy's got a massive mechanical suit that's got cannons and machine guns and everything, and everybody's just standing behind these guardrails, which are just randomly there, like watching and going, oh my God, Pat. I was like, why are you there? It's like, right, get away. In a very cheesy, type of thing. And like at the Times Square thing where Gwen's the only one who can recognize like how dangerous this is, and everybody else is just kind of stupidly cheering. And and that's admittedly the huge inconsistency with No Way Home, is not only is Electro not all goofy like that, but he mentions the fact that, I'm going to be back to being a nobody again, but there never really is any peaceful resolution for that character, I guess, because like, well, if you go back to your universe, you're just going to go back to being the weirdo. I was like, I don't know, but
dead.
Yeah, and the fact that it's almost like a meta thing that even though he brings up the fact that they stole his plans for the power grid and he wants to steal it back, none of the other characters in the film care about this. Like Spider-Man doesn't care, Gwen Stacy doesn't care, like nobody else at Oscar, like it has no bearing on anything other than Electro's. It's like the motivation they came up with for Electro to try and destroy and absorb the power grid, which I admit is better than the Lizard's motivation in the first one, but still, it doesn't need to be in the movie.
Well, let me tell you. So we do have Jyn Erso in this film as Felicia Hardy. Yes, Felicity Jones as Felicia Hardy, otherwise known in the comics as the Black Cat. Don't know why we have her. Maybe that was her character skulking around and being a member of Oscorp was going to have some bearing on Spider-Man 3. Also, cut from filmed but not released is an entire subplot with Mary Jane Watson, played by Shailene Woodley, the young lady from The Fault in Our Stars. Why that one? Because cancer movies. But that was all there, and it was all set up that they were going to introduce Mary Jane and sort of be the bridge to Part 3.
Sort of like how introducing Gwen Stacy in Spider-Man 3 was going to be the bridge to Spider-Man 4.
I still maintain that Gwen Stacy was first intending. I think that when they wrote Spider-Man 3, she was going to die at the end of Spider-Man 3. And they switched that at the last minute because they didn't want to have a downer ending. And with this one, I think because they wanted to differentiate themselves from the Raimi trilogy, they were like, well, we're going to be true to the comics. And when they even the costuming of Gwen Stacy is like, oh no, she's going to, all you had to see was what she was wearing in the trailer. And it's like, yes, she's going to die if they stay true to the comics. So if they had not done that, then there would have been a whole bunch of fans up in arms saying this is terrible. As it went, it's less ambiguous in terms of the death of Gwen Stacy than it is in the comic books. In the comic books, she's thrown off of one of the bridges, off a bridge. And Spider-Man, pew, tries to get her, and then she just, her head snaps back, and it is left up to the audience as to whether or not the fall killed her, or if it was grabbing her and then her head snapped back, and that's what, was it Spider-Man who killed her, or was it the fall that killed her? With this one,
how high from the bridge was it when she fell? Like how far of a fall was that?
like
Are
the
we talking
top,
are we talking like a Max Zorin type fall? Because if so, she'd be dead either way.
yeah, but she doesn't hit. She gets caught midway, and then the image, yeah, but
But if he didn't catch her, would it still be so far that she would have been dead anyway?
Oh yeah, she would have died either way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but in this one, Peter does attempt to save Gwen, and is just per second too late. And the question is, would she have died if her head didn't thwack off of the floor?
I think, well, yeah, if he had caught her a few inches up, because it presumably was her head that hit that, because you hear and see when her head hits it really hard, but you don't hear like a neck snap or anything. And certainly if you didn't catch her, she would have died from that fall anyway.
For sure.
And so, yes, you could tell that but I don't think it's the fault of the webbing, because she would have died either way. He just wasn't fast enough in getting to her.
Okay. So, yeah, all right. But, and again, it's a faithful recreate, or as close to a recreation as you're going to get on film. Kudos for that. And then also the performance by Andrew Garfield is heartbreaking.
I really did. That's why I like the ending with the goblins. They do pay that off. They do have her die. And because of how strong that aspect of the movie is, the whole Gwen and Peter relationship, I actually felt it. And I thought, okay, you did that really well, which makes me more frustrated that you shoved in all this other fluff that doesn't, need to be there. Because, like you said, you're probably right about why the Felicity Jones character is, Felicia Hardy. They probably were setting up, because at one point back then they were thinking about doing a Black Cat spinoff movie, and they went so far as to announce it and with the release dates and everything. And eventually, once they partnered with the MCU, that kind of they pushed all those other projects off to the side and they got canceled. So maybe they were going to do that. But again, I think it goes back to what friend of the channel, Robert Meyer Burnett, has said, which is don't put your universe in front of your characters. And that's what they did here. Like, oh, we have to set up Oscorp as the big villains. We have to have all these different designs for everything that they're going to do. We have to set up the Sinister Six and all. It's like, no, we don't need to do that. It's like the audience responded well to the Gwen and Peter relationship in the first movie, and let's invest in that for the second one. And the production on this one was rather rushed. So maybe they didn't wait to see what the reception was for the first movie before just diving into writing this one, rushing it. So it just didn't come together like it should have.
No, I don't think it came together either. I'm curious to see what if there would have been. And watching these two movies, I haven't watched. They're not my favorite, and they're not at the top of my list. I have them as a completionist for the Spider-Man cinematic universe, but I was most curious about this just because of Andrew Garfield in No Way Home. I wanted to revisit these movies to feel the weight of that character from that movie, and so now I feel like I'm being a completionist, and I can't wait to get to No Way Home. Just so I can sort of be a little bit closer to that and not having it just be a foggy memory of, oh yeah, Andrew Garfield was a Spider-Man.
Now, I feel it would have made the story even better if, given they had the whole thing where Gwen's going to go to Oxford and Peter tries to talk about wanting to go there with her, if he had something to do with her staying behind just a little too long and her dying as a result, instead of her, taking off to Oxford. I thought maybe that would have added a layer, because that's where I kind of thought the story was going, because it's like, why bring this up if, again, our fanboy aspect says, oh, they're going to kill her because that's the Gwen Stacy story and they're already setting up the Goblin. But why set up the idea that she's going to Oxford on top of that, unless maybe Peter is going to have something to do with her staying in New York long enough to, get killed? Which she didn't, because it's at the top of the bridge when he mentions that he's going to go to London with her, that the whole climax gets started with Electro, draining power to the whole city. And I thought they did a decent job trying to add some actual stakes to that, where you see that the air traffic control is trying to prevent the mid-air collision, and Aunt May, apparently a nurse working at the hospital, and how all the emergency things go offline. I'm like, that was well done. I mean, more so than me caring about what happens to all the people from the Lizard in the first movie. So I thought that was fine, but overall, it doesn't save it.
Well, and between the two, I am somewhat curious because Amazing Spider-Man, the first one, is the last time that we get to see Kevin Feige's name in the credits of a film not from the MCU. And Amazing Spider-Man 2, no Feige. Orsi takes over as the most prominent, him being one of the writers. Avi Arad, of course. But this seems to be the one where the movie was more pushed forward with business interests as opposed to telling a story. It's unfortunate. And I think it shows. I feel like it's overly long. 2 hours and 20 minutes. Too long for a Spider-Man movie, especially the mid movie and what would have been an anticipated trilogy. If I remember correctly as well, there was a situation with Andrew Garfield and Sony in terms of the promotion of this film. He was fairly lackadaisical. He wasn't participating very much in the promotion. I'm only remembering this sort of haphazardly.
I literally had forgotten about that until you just brought it up, but I vaguely remember now that you mention it that there was something about that. And I don't know if that had something to do with the way the movie turned out, because obviously you film a ton of shit for a movie, but you never know what the final edit's going to look like. So,
well, just ask Jared Leto about Suicide Squad.
Yeah, which he still will never watch.
Yes, well, apparently, yeah, he's not in it. He doesn't like it. But yeah. Between the two, which one do you prefer, 1 or 2?
I think 1, or yes. Because it at least has a semblance of the story. The connective tissue between the two halves is the George Stacy thing, because he meets Gwen mostly through the first half, and George doesn't stop till later, almost an hour into the movie. Because it's already dovetailing with what he's doing with Gwen and that kind of thing, you could see kind of where that's going, and that at least has somewhat of a through line where he dies and he makes him make that promise. Whereas the second one is just all over the place. And while I like the Harry-Peter relationship, it's not as awkward, I thought, as what was going on with Harry and Peter in Spider-Man 2 and 3 with that animosity, which I didn't understand how that could go for that long without any type of resolution to their personal life. This one didn't seem to have that. It's like, yes, they're a bit awkward in terms of being polar opposites, but opposites attract sometimes, and he's coming back into his life. So, and I like Dane DeHaan as Harry. I thought he did fine, but I liked it. But yeah, the Electro stuff just feels like anytime Electro comes on screen, I kind of feel like checking my watch or fast forwarding. It has nothing to do with the rest of the story. And he eventually becomes a plot. Like, they only bring him back in the finale as a plot device to give Harry the ability to break into the special division of Oscorp, basically, and to have an action scene with Spider-Man. It's like it really didn't need to be there. And so, yeah, so there's elements of both of them that I like, but they both kind of, it's sometimes it depends. Like, so I admit I like the Green Goblin ending of Amazing Spider-Man 2 better than the Lizard fight. Because I wasn't invested at all in the Lizard thing, whereas I was really invested in the Gwen Stacy Peter story. So even though the Goblin didn't look very good and was a little weird, I was still invested more in what was going on with Gwen in that story because of her and Peter's relationship than what was going on in the climax of the first one.
Well, and also the Spider-Man 2, Amazing Spider-Man 2 does have the downside of making Peter into a lovelorn stalker or uninvited third wheel everywhere that Gwen goes, which is kind of...
That was like, creepy when he says that. Oh, it's like, how much have you been following me? Oh, once a day. I'm like, ugh.
And I like Andrew Garfield in this, and I think that it's actually through the prism of No Way Home that I do enjoy him in this, but the character decisions really do make Peter somewhat unlikable. Just as a guy. And while I enjoy the performances, I just don't see the characters. And Dane DeHaan's an interesting actor. I find him more charismatic when he's a villain. I'm not a big fan of his when he's playing normal. So even when he is being normal at the beginning as Harry, he still comes off as it's like, okay, I'll just wait. You'll be evil soon enough. I know. And well, I guess if you're Harry Osborn, that's just the thing. But tragic tale of Harry Osborn. But it's when he does turn, I yeah, I I don't know. I just still see Dane DeHaan. I don't see the Green Goblin. Maybe after having been swept away by the magic of the Raimi movies as being like, and my biggest frame of reference, my heart swells with the 60s cartoon. And this one is obviously distancing itself from that to be less colorful, more grounded, especially in the first one. They try and liven it up in the second one. But I really prefer the Raimi, and I know, hot take. I prefer the Raimi trilogy to the Mark Webb duology. And I don't even think a third movie would have redeemed it. Again, it's just morbid curiosity to see where that train would have gone off the tracks. And I guess it did in the second one. That's why they never made a third one.
Plus, it's like there's no real sense of where the Sinister Six storyline is going. Because again, if I'm right, that the gentleman's plan is to bring in Peter to use him as a lab rat to continue the research. I'm like, okay, but that's not something that's going to happen because you can't have your main hero, Spider-Man, get captured and him being trapped or whatever. And it's like, so, and we've already seen him fight other Oscorp-related villains and Lizard and Goblin and Electro sort of, so, and Rhino. So it would just be an extension of what we've already seen. It wouldn't really be a new story. And the only thing it could have potentially offered is now that he would be overwrought with guilt over what happened to Gwen, particularly because of George, which I thought he should have mentioned that in No Way Home when he mentions that, Gwen, my MJ, I lost her. And it's like, he says, I'm never going to be able to forgive myself for that, but mostly because of, George. Like, that was the man's dying wish to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you royally, and yeah, granted, in Peter's defense, he does try and get Gwen out of it in the climax of the second one, and it doesn't work because she's like, no, I have my own agency, I make my own decisions. My father doesn't make those decisions for me. But and that's why some have argued that that No Way Home is sort of like finishing the character beats of Peter Parker's arc from Amazing Spider-Man movies in a way that's nice and kind of puts a bow on it that you wouldn't need to go back and do in Amazing Spider-Man 3, as people have been saying after seeing No Way Home. They're like, oh, now that they're popular again, go back and finish it. It's like, So, yeah, it's kind of, and plus they're trying to, on the one hand, they tried to make Harry almost seem like a tragic villain in the sense that he's dying. He's got a bunch of corporate stooges who hate him and are willing to do all this evil supervillainy type stuff to get rid of him and Max Dillon and all this. And he's very confrontational with them in the beginning of the boardroom meeting. He's like, oh yeah, we'll just sweep it under the rug, the Oscorp way. And yet by the end of the film, when he's sort of semi-cured or whatever, and the gentleman's talking to him about it, and Harry still has like the evil look in his eye, like he's still kind of evil. It's like, well, make up your minds. Is he a villain or is he kind of it's like, well, what is he? And what would that story have been for the third movie? Who knows?
Yeah. Well, and yeah, I don't know where it went, where it would have gone. It seems that aside from Sandman, every Spider-Man villain, once they achieve their powers, that is just part and parcel to, and also they've gone insane. Like, that's just something that you get when you're a Spider-Man villain. And luckily they sort of, moving forward, they do break that tradition. But yeah, Max goes insane, Harry goes insane. And I do appreciate Anonymous in the chat. How hard would it have been to have the tech to make a goblin mask that would look as if it were a real face? Anonymous, first of all, thanks for being here. They did. From what I understand, they did for the first Spider-Man movie. They made one, and then they basically said that they wanted to see Willem Dafoe's face, which I don't blame them. But then they went to a mask that was Power Rangery. But there was, I want to say Stan Winston took a pass at it, and it's very lifelike. They do have the makeup effect tests on YouTube.
I don't remember that.
But they did do that. But they disregarded it both times. And also, there is sort of a redesign of all of the major villains in the Mark Webb movies, in the Garfield flicks, because you have sort of snub-nosed lizard. He doesn't really look like the lizard. He kind of looks, well, I think the joke at the time was that he kind of looked like a Goomba from Super Mario Brothers, the 1993 version. And then Max Dillon as Electro is completely different. And just in terms of not being, I guess he would have looked weird in a green leotard and a star head, but they do change him, and it much more akin to the Ultimate Spider-Man design. And then Goblin Jr. and definitely with Rhino. But yeah, they should have stayed with it, or at least they should have employed it by the time they got back to Amazing Spider-Man 2. I think it would have been more impactful than, although Dane DeHaan is a creepy looking dude, and when they do put the troll makeup on him, it is disconcerting. I don't know. There's also something about...
I think they were also trying to mix the goblin thing with the disease that his father had. Because when you see the rash on his neck earlier in the movie, the goblin makeup on his face looks like an extension of that rash. Like all the serum did was just advance the disease as well as making him crazy, rather than trying to focus it on being goblin related.
And they just, like, even getting all the suit of armor and the glider, it just ends up being like it's a life support suit, isn't it?
I'm not sure. They never, I guess, because it heals his injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And the Colm Feore character just kind of runs away, and I was rooting for Harry to get that guy because he was really corrupt and evil, especially after one of our employees had an accident and he's turned into this crazy thing. Oh, we'll just send him to be locked up in Ravencroft and to be tortured by this mad scientist, played by Marcus Sokas, which is a really great short role. And I like that he actually gets his comeuppance in the same manner. I thought that was fun.
Yes.
But once Harry starts going all nuts in the basement, I kind of was with Colm Feore's character and just being, oh my God, what the hell's going on here? And kind of rooting for him to run rather than for Harry to kill him, even though he's evil, which was kind of weird. And then they don't really bring him up again. So I guess he just takes the glider and flies away. And then Oscorp is going to somehow try and sweep that under the rug too.
Well, yeah. Any of the logical, like, once you get to the top of the bridge and then the power grid and the death of Gwen Stacy, everything else that had been established up until then was almost just like moving pieces into place so that they can do that. And now that we have that, there's been enough. There's a crazy lair, as you brought up before, which doesn't make any sense. And the way that he finds the crazy lair doesn't make any sense. It's almost like a video game fetch quest. He goes and he breaks his clock radio, and then subway tokens fall out of it. So he goes to the subway and he puts the tokens in the thing, and then all of a sudden the subway car lifts out of the ground, and it's like, okay, hang on.
I was reminded of the remake of The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. It also has the escape route through the abandoned Roosevelt line. And when Peter first is looking up the Roosevelt thing, I figured he just writes the Roosevelt or whatever in the Bing search. I'm like, dude, write for the Bing search, Roosevelt, New York City. Like, be specific, and maybe it'll come up with, that would be the first thing that would come up in most searches. Mm-hmm. But even like you mentioned, there's no logic as to why it's in the subway, and he's not a mutated lizard, so he doesn't have to hide in a sewer. So.
Or maybe he was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, with Spider-Man 3, the swinging is good. There's a lot of closer to the action, or closer to the ground action going on in Spider-Man 2, Amazing Spider-Man 2. I like the CGI is believable. I like the effects better in Spider-Man 2 than I do in Spider-Man 1. But all in all, I don't know how often I'm going to be. And I nearly forgot. Spider-Man 1 does have a case of horror chiller theater from SCTV. It's like, we have 3D, don't you know? Woo! And they do a whole bunch of stuff that is obviously like the web pulling someone far or close to the camera and then coming back down. And like, it is, I've got that. Yeah, I have the 3D Blu-ray. If anybody has a 3D TV, let me know.
I hate it when movies do that, when they make shots which are specifically designed for 3D to the point that somebody watching it in 2D feels that it's like, once you're aware of the camera and aware that they're trying to do something flashy for the sake of that effect, it just doesn't work. Yes. I'm reminded of The Force Awakens, where you have that very super up close shot of Rey shoving her staff onto her speeder, and it's like the spear, it's like close up, and the staff is like coming like right in your face. I'm like, what's that about? And then the random spire sticking out of the nose of Kylo's Star Destroyer for some reason. That in 3D it's like really narrow, but otherwise there's no reason to be there and no reason for that shot. I hate it when movies do it. Like, don't do that. And then as back to the story, once again, in Amazing Spider-Man 2, the whole stuff with Richard Parker and that backstory just has no business being in that movie. It's like, throw that back in the first one. Because if you're going to have the whole emotional confrontation between Peter and Uncle Ben over his father in that first movie, then that's the story where you need to resolve the backstory between Richard Parker and what he was doing, and whether or not Peter was right to be upset with him for abandoning him and not coming back, or whether he was wrong to be upset about it. You don't need to shove that over, like, well past the halfway point, nearly 2/3 of the way into your second movie, where you have like 3 or 4 other plots that you're trying to tie up. It's like, it doesn't need to be there.
Agreed. Well, and the only reason that it is there is to set it in a different sort of narrative cycle than the original Raimi trilogy. This is the ultimate version. There has to be more intrigue. There has to be more reason and rationale behind it. Oh, why is it? Oh, I forget, because it's also very convoluted. Is there something specific about how it was supposed to be Peter who gets bitten by the spider?
Wait, what?
It was genetically predisposed to give him powers?
Well, because his father gene spliced with his own DNA.
Oh, so right.
Because Peter's the son, it's not going to kill him. Right. And Harry believed that, hey, your father, because that's something that Harry brings up. It's like, yeah, your father worked on these. These are the spiders are meant to do. That's why it's going to, if it saves Spider-Man, it's going to save me. And that's right. I couldn't remember earlier. That's what Harry brings up when he first asked Peter for Spider-Man's blood. He brings up the fact that, hey, I know for a fact that Spider-Man got his powers from the work that your father did here at Oscorp because of the type of stuff they were doing. And if it obviously worked for Spider-Man, it's going to work for me. And that's why Peter probably, they don't break the fourth wall at that moment, but Peter probably in that moment immediately figured it out that, oh, well, if he worked on it, it's probably got his own DNA in it or something. Because otherwise there's no reason for Peter to suddenly think that, oh, well, it benefited, but it's going to kill you, Harry, or make you worse. It's like the only reason for Peter to think that would be if he automatically suspected that, oh, well, if it was my dad that made it, then maybe he did use himself as like a test subject, in which case that would be compatible. Because otherwise there's really no reason for Peter to think that Harry getting bit by the Spider-Man thing would turn him into a monster or kill him.
Yeah. Well, the creation of the Green Goblin is purely by accident, based on desperation and happenstance. Like it doesn't have the same menace as Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin, just in terms of him, like a science experiment or a formula for an advancement in human evolution gone awry, as opposed to inject me with blood mixed with some form of cure. And
I think it was, the thing with Harry is that, like I mentioned, it's kind of mixing his disease and enhancing the effects of the disease. And it's not so much that he's crazy, it's that he's angry. That when he says, oh, it wasn't you, it's not that Spider-Man said no, it's that you said no, Peter. You were fine with me potentially dying or whatever. And I think the reason he goes after Gwen is more from just anger and rage and bitterness than it is because I'm a crazy Green Goblin type thing. It's like the fact that he looks like the Green Goblin and is using that tech is sort of superfluous to the real conflict, which is that he's pissed off that his best friend would rather let him die than at least give him a fighting chance.
Well, and also, I would assume that the attack by the lizard on New York City would have been well documented, well known.
Right.
And so there would have been like sort of residual chemical compounds and formula regarding how those people were cured. And Peter was known to be working with Dr. Connors before the outbreak. Harry could just ask Peter or employ the help of Kurt Connor. Like
ask him for like a cure to the,
not a cure, assistance in the science of it, in terms of the biological medicine or whatever your formulaic scientific technobabble is. Like he has more benefit asking Peter than he does asking for the blood from Spider-Man.
right, because he couldn't, I'm assuming that he wouldn't be able to get in the same room with the lizard. I'm guessing that because the gentleman has the connections he has, that he's able to get in there and talk to them and do what he wants to them. But you're right, he could have just asked Peter, because that would have been documented, especially like the how Spider-Man saved the city and Gwen Stacy saved the city, which is something else that I thought was odd, that you'd think that Gwen would maybe have a higher position or something because she invented the antidote that saved the city, you know? Or even from that standpoint at Oscorp, it's like, oh, she's a genius because she was able to whip this up like that. They would promote the hell out of her instead of having her just be a low-level analyst on the computer or whatever. Like people would know about that. So you're right. They should have asked Peter, or hell, just asked Gwen, because again, Gwen is the one who invented the thing, and he recognizes her when he's in the elevator with her. He's like, oh, Gwen Stacy, you know. So it's like, okay, so he's heard of her, and I guess he thought that instead of going the route of having to take the time to develop something, I guess he just assumed that a drop of Spider-Man's blood would just be faster and easier. Because he says he's playing for time. He's like, I don't have time. This is why he keeps pressuring Peter to do that. So,
which also doesn't make any sense.
I also don't understand why he thinks that Spider-Man's blood is magically going to cure his problem, because he didn't know who Spider-Man was. It's not like he has any reason to think that Spider-Man was suffering from some type of disease that he got or was cured of anything by becoming, you know, Spider-Man. So I don't really follow the logic as to why because he mentions that the alleged benefits that this project was supposed to have, the genetic applications of it, but alleged is not the same as a definite. So it's like you're gonna go out on a hunch to get Spider-Man's blood. It's like, okay, it's like, again, there's too many plot lines going on, too many writers in the room, and I'm feeling that it's Avi Arad shoehorning in extra characters that don't need to be there.
Yeah. I don't know why I didn't think of it until just now, but I wish I had gone and checked out the merchandising specifically from Amazing Spider-Man 2, just to see if there had to have been a Rhino action figure.
Oh, like, for sure.
Yeah. Like, I'm wondering, I should, you know, I've got the power of the internet, the power of the sun in the palm of my hand. Anonymous says, I hated that a bullet graze in the leg made Peter act like he was about to die. Yeah. At the beginning.
Was that the first one or the second one?
That was the first one. That he gets a graze through the leg and he's about to go running so he can swing. Oh, yeah. No, wait. Is it the graze? Am I thinking of that one? Because I thought he was trying to swing and then he falls on like he grabs onto a building. The building breaks. He falls onto a fire escape and then he climbs back up. And that's when they do the cranes to make it so that he can get to Oscorp quicker. I'm wondering, where does he get grazed in the leg? I forget. Anonymous, which movie? We got two here. I just want to check out Amazing Spider-Man 2 merchandise.
Another thing that reminds me of, however, is that in the moment in the first movie when the cops finally have Peter surrounded and George unmasks him, and he's got his head like hanging down, but apparently he doesn't recognize who he is at first. So he does the backflip to get out of there, and it wasn't until he gets to the top of the tower that he sees that it's Peter. I did like in the first movie that the lizard, after Connors starts coming back in the process of being cured, that he saves Peter and is conscientious enough to tell him to go check on George.
Oh yeah, that was nice, and I did like how he did, like how Kirk Connors does sort of shake the lizard madness
Yeah,
at that time. But yeah,
yeah.
there was Amazing Spider-Man 2 toys. Yes, not many, but there were.
Well, I'd imagine it does feel like a total toy opportunity with
Oh
the
yeah,
Rhino and all the other stuff inside Oscorp.
first movie right before the crane thing. Yeah, the
Yeah.
cop altercation. He acted so wounded he could barely walk. Yeah, and he sort of hobbles for a bit and then starts running. Yeah. Okay.
Hmm.
But yeah, like and for a guy who is getting beat up consistently, he does well. He picks and chooses his moments as to when he's actually going to react to those injuries. But yeah, I guess I would
I feel, to be fair, that that's also something that a lot of superhero movies do, and action movies in general, that they like that old trope of when a bomb goes off and it just blasts the hero back a couple feet and they're not even like the least bit bothered by it, and it's like sometimes it's really egregious and other times it's not, and it's
yeah.
like and because the plot demands it, it might hurt the character, or like what kills a villain will just, oh, it's not going to bother the hero. I think the most egregious instance of that I've seen was on a recent rewatch of Black Widow when Yelena throws the grenade into the helicopter at the end, and a massive explosion, and she just kind of gets blown off and falls to the
Yes.
sky, and somehow does not get ensnared by the fireball. Like, that was probably the most egregious instance of that I've ever seen. Whereas other movies do a good job of trying to hide it, like in No Time to Die, when Bond goes into the stairwell fight. Yes, the fact that 5 grenades fall on top of him should have been enough to bring down that entire stairwell. But because of all the steam and the block and the way they're angling the camera, they kind of make it feel somewhat believable. Same when he uses the armored door to block from the second flashbang impact. But that's the thing; it's verisimilitude, and whether or not they have it, and they'll play around with that a lot in these types of films.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And Jill says, you're reaching for something to be positive about a Spider-Man movie when just the swinging is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is accurate. We are.
Do you remember when people were saying after these 2 movies came out that it seemed like the thought process behind it begins, of all the things going wrong, may have begun with the possibility that they hired Mark Webb to direct the movies because his last name was Webb?
I do recall that, and I forget. I know that there is a YouTube critic, commentator, who does have a consistent clip of Mark Webb directing and just being so half-assedly enthusiastic, being like, yeah, great, ha ha ha, and it's just like, no, you don't belong. And I can see why they chose him. I can see why they were trying to elevate the relationship between Peter and Gwen, and they got 500 Days of Summer, and they figured, whatever, action scenes are in previs. We know where we want to go. We just need someone to come in and direct the script that we give him. And second unit directors are going to take care of the action. He'll be good with the actors, and that's how we're going to make this one. We'll churn it out. And we'll call it a day. And this one's only 2 years after the previous. Like, we're 2012 to 2014. They were churning these, and they were hoping for the best. But this is also like 2014. We're smack dab in the middle of the MCU, in the heyday, the height. And I don't know where we were in terms of the Dark Knight trilogy.
That ended the same summer as Amazing Spider-Man. Came out because Amazing Spider-Man came out in the end of June, and then Dark Knight Rises came out like 3 weeks later.
Oh, well, then there you go. Yeah. So, like, there's so much better stuff with more thought, and this is the one that really feels like comic book product, as opposed to telling a story or trying to follow the lore. Being a faithful adaptation.
Because they had like 4 movies worth of different plots between these 2 movies that they could have mined, and instead, by shoving them all into, most of them getting shoved into the first sequel, the Amazing Spider-Man 2, it just kind of collapses in on itself. And so, yeah, it kind of, I don't know what the obsession is with Sony wanting to do Sinister Six and why. Because again, when you're making a movie unlike a TV show where you're assuming that your core audience has read the comics and know who these characters are and you don't set them up, in a movie you have to appeal to the casual audience. Well, you're going to have to set up all of these characters, or if you don't want to do that and just have them revealed to be random members of Oscorp or whatever, it's like, well, then you're setting up what amounts to a bunch of action scenes, but what exactly would the story be of Sinister Six other than, oh, Spider-Man versus a bunch of Sinister Six? Like, in the comics, it kind of, yes, it's very cartoonish, but it works because it's like comics and cartoon logic. Whereas live action, I feel the audience isn't going to suspend their disbelief that far. At least they're going to want better storytelling. Kind of like in the MCU, where they decided, well, we can't have Thanos' whole motivation just be killing half the universe to impress Lady Death because that's really shallow. Works in the comics because he's a complete maniac compared to the way he is in the movies, but we want there to be more heart and relevance and people who invest in it more. So they came up with the whole population thing. And I feel kind of it's the same thing that Avi Arad and them have to ask themselves over this obsession with Sinister Six. Like, what are you hoping to get out of that? It's like, is it worth sacrificing good storytelling and what could have been a really great Peter Gwen Stacy arc between these two films to instead shove in all this extra crap for the sake of setting up Sinister Six?
Well, I do have a question for you. I do want to say hi to Daniel's Hot Topic, saying I just got back from town. I just saw the Super Mario Brothers movie again on the big screen. The ticket was $12.50, but it was worth it. $12.50 sounds reasonable.
It was a fun movie.
Yeah. And Jill gives you a big Rainbow Road. And Daniel's Hot Topic says, I was so angry that they canceled Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man 4 and rebooted it with Mark Webb. Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, I hated it. Was inferior. Nobody beats Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man. I'm sort of with you. He is my favorite Spider-Man of the cinematic versions. But in terms of, and I know that doesn't necessarily, I know, Kat, you're more of a Tom Holland fan, are you not?
Tobey Maguire. I think I kind of subscribe to the consensus that Tobey is the best Peter Parker in terms of the comics, the nerdy kind of kid where it's kind of believable that he's like a wallflower and he could pretty much reasonably be Spider-Man without anybody giving it a second thought because it's Peter. I think Andrew Garfield's the best Spider-Man because I like his personality when he's in the suit, when he's out actually fighting crime. And I think Tom Holland's pretty decent at both. And it's nice to have somebody who's decent at both there, even though Holland's is a lot more hyper. But I like those ones too.
Well, and I still haven't seen Far From Home. I'm sort of looking forward to going through those just to get a more complete idea of the trilogy of MCU Spider-Man. But what I was going to ask, as you mentioned with the Sinister Six, and honestly, sort of what I think that Avi Arad brings to his superhero movies is it doesn't feel like he knows the difference between plot and story. He knows what's going to happen, but he doesn't know why it's going to happen, except for this is what we have to set up for the movie because this will get butts in seats. Now he's a producer, but the plot is not in service of the story, which is a weird.
Like what was the impetus to give Sandman on the one hand a really sympathetic motivation, and then on top of that retcon him as being the killer of Uncle Ben? It's like, oh, we want the forgiveness, but why with this character? Why not have the forgiveness thing be between Harry and Peter, and just let the Sandman thing be what the Sandman thing started out as, which is him trying to help his daughter? Like, why do you do that? And I think it's like you said, it's he doesn't know the difference between plot and story. Oh, let's do that, all that kind of thing, you know. Like again, setting up Electro sort of as a character who, after getting captured and sent to Ravencroft Institute or whatever, only is brought back as a plot device to help Harry, get the suit or whatever. So
yeah,
it's like, okay, that's plot, but that's not story.
Right. It's just sort of, I do this because of this, then I do this, but there's no real motivation behind it except for the superficial. I don't want to be sick anymore. It's like, yep, that makes sense. That's pretty basic. All right.
Well, I could get behind that because if you're dying and you're literally have a timetable for it, then yeah, I could totally be invested in Harry's thing. Because the Electro thing didn't really have much going on. It's just like, oh, we bring him back because, we'll throw him out of the story in the same way Harry got thrown out of the story for a while in Spider-Man 3, and we'll bring him back when we need him as the plot, because of the plot demands it, it's rather than any inherent story reason. So,
yep. What did I gave Spider-Man 3 a 5.
Yeah, ratings. What do you give the first one, Amazing Spider-Man 1?
I would give the Amazing Spider-Man 1. I would probably give it a 5 as well.
I think it's better than Spider-Man 3. I gave that one, I think, a 4. So I think I would give I think I give it a 6.
Okay.
I didn't enjoy enough of it that I can give the first one a 6 out of 10 webs.
And
how
then
about the sequel?
Amazing Spider-Man 2, I do think is also, I don't know, the death of Gwen Stacy bumps it up to a 6 for me, just because I am heartbroken by the death of Gwen Stacy and that relationship, and I really enjoyed, like, I think that the culmination of the first two movies in the death of Gwen Stacy, because of the chemistry and the performances of Andrew Garfield and
Emma Stone.
Emma Stone, you know, I might, yeah, I think that I'm going to switch those. I'm going to say Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a 5 and Amazing Spider-Man 1 is a 6. And I'm switching those because I'm basically giving Amazing Spider-Man 2 a 6 for one moment.
Yeah, I'm also giving Amazing Spider-Man 2 a 5. And the first one a 6. So we're in agreement on this.
Yeah.
The other part of the movie I did like that I forgot to talk about is the fact that he does take time off after Gwen dies, to the point that people are wondering what happened to Spider-Man and where is he. And I like that he actually, I mean, they don't specify how long it's been, but I like that it's something that has been weighing on him. And maybe they could have done something with that in the third movie, but they kind of do something with it in No Way Home. So yeah, we'll get to that one when we get to it. But yeah, I give it a 5 just because it's overstuffed. But I like Harry Osborn. At least I like Dane DeHaan as Harry Osborn, and I like the Peter and Gwen Stacy stuff in the Aunt May. I thought were the highlights. So,
Daniel's Hot Topics gives it Amazing Spider-Man a 4 out of 10. And Daniel, what do you give Amazing Spider-Man 2? But also, Daniel said, I'm so glad they did not kill Tobey Maguire Spider-Man in No Way Home, because it was supposed to happen, but they signed on Tobey for Secret Wars. I hope he won't die in that movie. Have you been keeping up with any of the upcoming slate as to whether or not that's a possibility? This multiverse thing is messing with my head.
No, and I'm not sure any reliable sources reported that.
We're still far enough away that I'm okay with it.
Yeah, and I feel that would have been a big story all over the place if that was something leaked from a reliable source. Who knows? It might be true. I admit, yeah, it's a fake out when he survives getting stabbed in the back by Green Goblin, but it wouldn't have been conducive to that moment, because if you kill him and he dies trying to stop Peter from killing Norman, that's just going to make Peter angrier or the other Peter angrier. And it's like, well, that wouldn't really, so it kind of works that he survives. But we'll get to that more when we get to it. But that's, so yeah, maybe he comes back, maybe not. I don't know. I kind of feel that at this point, I don't feel there's a need to revisit every franchise just because. It's like, okay, you screwed up Spider-Man 3 to the point that Raimi didn't come back, and you screwed up The Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2, especially the second one, to the point that Feige, as the story goes, walked into what's her name? Office.
Amy Pascal.
And pitched this idea, and she was so offended initially at the idea that he was just treating it like a foregone conclusion that they should just give up on the Andrew Garfield films, because before the second one came out, they'd already announced release dates for the third one in 2016 and the fourth one in 2018. Because they were already, again, planning all these sequels ahead. Who knows if they had any scripts or stories for them. And Feige was just like, yeah, no. And he just, and that really upset her. But eventually she came around to realizing it was a good idea. And,
well, it's also the behind the scenes. Before I move on to the behind the scenes, Daniel gives Amazing Spider-Man 2 a 2 out of 10. I understand.
Yeah,
I absolutely understand. But that was part of the notorious Sony leaks, was Amazing Spider-Man 2 and the notes that Kevin Feige gave. on how to fix this movie.
Yeah.
I did not, some days I should research.
I don't
I
recall reading the actual notes. I just recall that one of the things that eventually came out, actually not even at the Sony leak, it was only a couple years ago when they told this. I think maybe Amy told the story about how her first meeting with Kevin went over the prospect of bringing Spidey into the MCU, which is easy for her to laugh at now, laugh at herself now because it paid off in spades. But at the time, I could see why she was upset about it because, yeah, if a big shot producer walked into my office and basically treated it like a foregone conclusion, like, yeah, you're a dumpster fire, why don't we just do this instead? I might be a little miffed at first. But because that just kind of didn't follow up. But then again, it didn't feel like there really was much more story to tell other than for the sake of, shoehorning in more villains for a Sinister Six thing, because they already resolved the backstory between Peter's parents. That was done. And that's one of the big highlights I could say for the movies for me, because again, I've never been one of those people to question, like, even all those years growing up watching Star Wars before the prequels came along, I never wondered why, like in Empire, when he says, "I am your father," and then in Return of the Jedi, when he confirms it, I was like, okay, but I didn't, even as a little kid, feel obsessed having to know that story. And when Luke asked, but is now inconsistent, when he asked Leia about who her real mother was, it's like, okay, but I was never one of those people who thought that we needed it, demanded an explanation as to why Luke's living with his aunt and uncle. It's like, okay, he just lives with his aunt and uncle, whatever.
yes.
And that's why to this day, when it comes to especially Star Wars, everybody freaks out when they don't know the lineage of everybody. It's like, who cares? Like, I'd never read a Spider-Man comic until probably 2014 or somewhere around there, and I was never bothered not knowing why Peter was living with his aunt and uncle. It's just like, okay, whatever. So I admit that as bonkers as these two movies are, and again, not pleading ignorance as to what the actual story is in the comics, I liked that they did do that, because that helps show that there's at least something different that these two films had to offer to the lore.
Yes.
Even as goofy as it is, at least there's something there,
As
I
goofy.
didn't realize it was a big thing. I thought in the comics that, okay, maybe his parents got killed in a car accident or something. Like, who knows? I didn't get the idea that it would be this big deal. And so I thought, oh, okay, that's kind of neat to learn that story, but the execution was just really off.
Yes. Well, in regard, hang on. Daniel says, Deadpool 3 starts filming in a week or two, and Hugh Jackman posted a pic of him with the beard from Logan. So we know pretty much this will be a variant of that Wolverine.
That's reading a lot into it because it's just a beard. I mean, maybe because he's older, because I wouldn't think they'd want to touch. I wouldn't think I mean, I know Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds are really friends and all that, but I wouldn't think he'd want to go into Deadpool 3 specifically to mock Logan, which most people consider to be the crown jewel of Wolverine, cinematic Wolverine. I mean, maybe they'll do it. Maybe they'll mock that or something, but I don't know. We'll see.
I'm sort of wary. I don't know. We'll see how Deadpool 3 goes. It's one of those ones that I have to be in the seat to really judge.
I remember thinking the first one was funny because I saw it in a packed theater, and when you're with an audience, movies like that can tend to be funnier. It probably had the most evil comic book villain ever in terms of what he's doing and how he's doing it, but I didn't like the aesthetic of the film at all. It just felt very gray and dull. Like the whole movie feels like it takes place in a landfill, especially at the end. The second movie I like
more evil than the High Evolutionary.
Well, it's along the same lines, pretty much.
Right.
And the second, and they get more graphic in the first Deadpool than they do with High Evolutionary. But in the second film, I liked the plot with the kid and him, but I didn't think any of the humor was funny except for the one scene with all the cameos of whatever that team was, where Brad Pitt had that cameo and they all get killed. I thought that was funny. The X-Force, I thought that was funny, but the rest of it I thought was kind of dumb. And it didn't help that I didn't see Deadpool 2 until probably like a month after it came out, because I was hospitalized and stuff at the time. And so by the time I got to see it, there was like literally only 2 other people in the theater. So you didn't have that kind of shared experience where you tend to find things funnier when you're with a whole audience of people who also find it funny. So watching it by myself pretty much was just kind of like, eh. And yeah, so I'm not as jazzed about Deadpool 3. I get why everybody loves it and wants to see it. And it's like, that's fine. But I'm not I'm not over the moon obsessed with, oh, we got to see the third Deadpool movie. It's like, whatever.
I'm of a mind that Deadpool 3 is going to be almost a litmus test as to what Disney does with the Fox properties moving forward. It's more of that that I'm intrigued in than actually seeing a Deadpool 3 movie. I have made no bones about my appreciation for adult situations and humor, and I thought that one of the most incredible things about Deadpool 1 is that there was pegging. It was a Valentine's Day miracle. International Women's Day, yes, it was released on Valentine's Day, but so I thought that kind of humor really added to the flavor of Deadpool and the spirit behind the character. And I don't know how much of that is going to be watered down Kool-Aid in under the umbrella of the Diz.
I did hear a rumor that or a statement I thought they put out that they said they would allow it to be R-rated if it ended up being written as such.
Well, it's a Deadpool movie if it isn't written as R-rated. And again,
well, remember when the buyout thing of Fox happened, they put out that PG-13 edit of Deadpool 2. Mm-hmm. I think as a litmus as a test run to see if fans would respond to it, and not many did. So I think if people had overwhelmingly, or families had overwhelmingly embraced the PG-13 cut, that this movie would most definitely be watered down PG-13. But it was not that well received, as I recall. Most people didn't care about it, which I think had more to do with the fact that everybody already saw and owned the second Deadpool movie by then on R. They're not gonna. The same crowd isn't gonna rush out to see a watered down version of it. Like, the people who were interested would have seen it anyway. And I think that's probably the impetus that they've had to say, okay, if we're gonna do this, we got to go all in like the first two.
Right. Well, that is for the future, and I am looking forward to it. I don't know, because any of the MCU moving forward, we are going to be dealing with variants. There is the multiverse that we have to contend with. If they do reference Logan or bring him over shortly before his death in Logan, cool. But Deadpool 3 is it's far off that I'm willing to sit on it and wait until. Is it coming out? No, is it coming out this year, or is it coming? We don't know yet. Okay, great. Well, I hope it's good. That's all I ever hope for when these movies are coming out. And if they aren't, then in about I don't know, year and a half, 2 years after it comes out, we'll do a Deadpool retrospective and say how it was diminishing returns. Thanks, Ryan Reynolds. Burp. Have some aviation gin, not sponsored. But yeah, Deadpool under Disney, I don't know yet. I'll have to see the movie to judge it for myself. Did you want to hear about the Feige notes on Spider-Man 2?
Yeah, if you got them.
Yeah, just briefly. Kevin Feige says that he really loved Electro. I'm just paraphrasing. I'm referencing comicbookmovie.com, who are referencing the Sony leaks. Feels like you may not need the scene in his apartment, which makes him seem completely crazy and hard to relate to, just as you said. Like that idea that the eel goes in his mouth, and instead of burrowing, you see it glow within him. Andrew's performance is all over the place. A lot of crying and then a lot of mania. Hard to track him emotionally. It undermines his reaction to Gwen's death because he gets upset and emotional a lot. Yeah, but I guess, maybe I didn't notice it as much because we just finished watching Spider-Man 3, which has per capita the most crying. Likes the idea that May finds out that he's Spider-Man when he finds his costume instead of just the Rosemary Harris version of Aunt May, wink, wink, all the time.
She did find the oh, yeah, because I thought they played that off almost like a joke, because he's trying to go do the laundry, and she mentions that last time he did the laundry, it turned everything red and blue, which is a reference to her. Or maybe that's what he means. Like, yeah, she found the costume and apparently didn't open it all the way up to see that it actually was the Spider-Man costume and just assumed that Peter screwed up the laundry.
Mm-hmm.
But she didn't know he was Spider-Man.
I find that interesting, that Kevin Feige's interest in Andrew Garfield and his performance, and that that would have fallen squarely in the lap of Mark Webb's direction.
Yeah, and I'm surprised he also liked the Electro stuff, again, because it's such a unnecessary plot line compared to, like, I would have been curious as to what he thought of the Harry Osborn plot, seeing as it's clear that they're trying to do the whole Death of Gwen Stacy storyline, and you kind of have to make both aspects of that work. And so, but maybe those are only part of the notes, and the leak didn't cover the rest. But
right,
yeah, so that's interesting.
It is, and again, it's like from the perspective of a man sitting high on success at the time from the MCU.
Yeah.
So that is interesting. And speaking of the MCU, next up on our roster for the Spider-Verse is going to be Spider-Man Homecoming.
Yes.
And we are going to have that as soon as possible. Thank you so much to everyone who has been looking forward to this particular review of this double feature. We sort of had a couple of stutter stops, but we appreciate your patience in being here. Thanks to Jill for being here. Daniel's Hot Topics, as always, bringing the pleasant speculation. I appreciate your moxie, son. And Anonymous, thank you for being here. And I appreciate that you guys actually saw these movies. That's great. And Captain Finity, thank you for being here. And yes, if you are looking for writing inconsistencies, for sure, check these two movies out. Although you don't, superheroes aren't your jam. Ignore these. You don't have to. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And then also, speaking of Jill, I will be with her discussing the third season of Quantum Leap on In the Loop. Right here on the Fantasmagorium show. What do you got going on, Kat?
Well, I got this show going on. I've got Unifying Force every second and fourth Sunday of the month on the Virtual Cantina Network YouTube channel. And you find me on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at SlySnide. And you can find me in a video recently posted to the Burnett Network called Cat's Corner, in which I go through part of my physical media collection beginning with the letter A. So hope to record the second episode this weekend, and not sure when it'll be thrown up there, but looking forward to it.
That's awesome. Fantastic. Oh, what did we say? How did we? Oh, geez. How do we end? How do we finish?
I think maybe it had something to do with. Now, speaking of Jameson, wasn't there a reference to Jameson in one of these two movies? I thought there was.
Oh no, they do, because that's how Harry wants to, because he mentions that you've been selling pictures,
right? Even though they didn't show them, which I think is probably for the best, because you're right, they couldn't really. You're not going to top J.K. Simmons in that. Don't bother. So it's like that. So that was fine. I think maybe original. I meant to go back and watch the endings of our first ones to see if we had it, but I have a feeling if it was anything, it had something to do with Jameson related.
Do you want pictures of Spider-Man?
Yes, damn it.